Me and you, God promises us this, and we say, yes, and I'm going to do it. And the next day, we've forgotten it, or God didn't reassure us, or God didn't tub-tub on us, or God didn't make us feel like, so we say, well, the promise must have expired, you know. Joshua, for years and years and years, and the rest of his life, he held on to one promise. Joshua died at 110 years old. And at that time, they still hadn't finished all the promised land. There were still some parts. And Joshua was still moving forward based on one promise that he received when he was young. The best thing about Joshua that shows us here, first thing it shows us is that the promised land isn't only for the Moseses. If promised land was for Moses, I would be discouraged. I would say, God doesn't speak to me in clouds. God doesn't speak to me in earthquakes. I never parted a sea. I never climbed a mountain and got 10 commandments straight from God's mouth. I'm a low-level guy. Well, Joshua, as far as that, is a low-level guy. Joshua shows that quiet time and getting a message from God isn't earth-shaking or this feeling, whatever. Joshua's a normal guy who read his normal Bible, had a normal quiet time like the rest of us, and in his normal quiet time, God said, I have a promise, you're going to inherit this. And Joshua was more than normal, was extraordinary, and then he held it, and he kept it for the rest of his life. And he didn't let anyone shake him. Even when odds were against him, even when people said, come on, Joshua, you've been chasing this stupid promise for 50 years. Let it go. It's done. Joshua said, no. God promised. God is a man of his word. I wish that me and you didn't need the constant reaffirmation that we always look for. If God told you yesterday to do something, until he tells you differently, it still applies. If God told you yesterday that, I don't know, we just throw out some examples, that relationship ain't good for you. The fact that he didn't say anything this morning doesn't mean that it's good for you. If God told you last week it's important to go to church every Sunday, the fact that he hadn't spoken in a couple weeks doesn't mean that it's less important to go to church on Sunday. You see why we always go in circles in the wilderness? Because we can't hold on to stuff. God gives us, we go back. God gives us, we go back. Joshua, God gave him, he went forward. And he held on to it. Imagine I tell you, let's say we're going in Egypt, okay, and we're trying to do, what's the most dangerous thing to do in Egypt? Worse. Cross the street, very good, okay? Cross the street in Egypt. You don't want to be caught doing it without a helmet, okay? If you're like me, just pay the guy 1 guinea and let him drive you to the other side, okay? 1 guinea is a few pennies, okay? Trust me. I remember we were in Egypt for my ordination, okay? We were trying to cross the street in front of the cathedral. That's the worst of the worst, okay? And I remember William Shoy back in D.C. was with me over there. We got out of the car, he's like, okay, we're going to cross the street, and I'm like, he's like, okay, just relax. Okay, he's like, whenever you're ready. And I'm like, I was never ready, okay? I was never ready to cross the street. So what he did is, he grabbed me by the hand, he said, when I say go, you go. He's father of confession, priest, and all that kind of stuff. I had no choice but to listen. Now, what would happen if he said go, and we get halfway across the street, and he doesn't say anything else, he says go, and he grabs by the hand, and then he doesn't say anything halfway through the street. I say, oh, wait a minute, maybe I should stop here. He's not saying go anymore. How many of us do that with God? God said, let's go. Okay, let's go. And we start to go. And then there's some difficulty, and then there's some obstacle, and then there's some this. Then we look at God and we say, well, God hasn't really told me to go in a couple days, so maybe he changed his mind. Or maybe God has a different plan. Maybe just God wanted me to come to see, to experience the nice street, okay, and see how beautiful it is from the middle, and then go back to where I came from. Not Joshua. If God says go, you go. When do you stop? When he says stop. If he says go, you go. If he says stop, you stop. That's a life of faith. Okay? Life of faith is not just hearing a promise, but trusting in the promise. And until God changes the promise promise is good. Another source of Joshua's power was Joshua not only got promises from God and heard the Word of God, Joshua lived inside the Word of God. And if we want the power to make us invincible, we must learn to live in the Word of God. Now notice I'm not saying read the Word of God, study the Word of God, not even saying memorize the Word of God. I'm saying to live in the Word of God. The Word of God that we have here in this book is the same Word of God that's up in heaven right now, the Logos of the Father, who is controlling the entire universe. And when we live in this, we live in Him. And when this lives in me, then He lives in me. We must learn to live in the Word of God. Verse 7, Joshua chapter 1. God tells him, okay, many times God tells him, be strong and be courageous, and do not be dismayed. Why do you think God says, be strong, be courageous, do not be dismayed? Logic. Why does God say, be strong, do not be discouraged, do not be dismayed? Because Joshua, when someone told him, you're Puerto Rico, and you're going to invade the United States, Joshua was not a weirdo. Joshua was like me and you. And he was scared, and he was dismayed. Normal person. Joshua is not a supernatural person. Moses, I can't relate to Moses. Joshua, I can relate very much. God said, you're Puerto Rico, you take down the big boys. Joshua got scared. So over and over he's saying, do not be scared. What does Joshua do when he's scared? God says, don't be scared. You don't be scared. Because God says, don't be scared. What does Joshua do when he is dismayed and discouraged? God says, do not be discouraged, do not be dismayed. Joshua doesn't be discouraged, doesn't be dismayed. Okay? Verse 7. Only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. This book of law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate in it day and night, that you may observe to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous. Then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you, be strong and of good courage, do not be afraid nor be dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. God not only gives him promises, but He gives him the foundation of where those promises and that power is coming from. This book of law shall not depart from your mouth.